This is going to be fun, bringing up the graphic and putting it back down again.
Have fun doing the editing.
Yes.
Welcome to today's spoiler video. We have a couple of really cool things in store for you today. One, we've got a timeline that we have finally created to visualize what our story looks like. We also want to share a new theme that we have seen emerging in our story. And then we're going to share one each idea or thought that we have for our story that we have not shared with each other yet. And we'll get to that at the very end.
You talked about the theme that is emerging for our story. One of the things that I've seen that makes novels really effective is on one layer, they have the obvious story. This is, in our example, this is a story about time travel and things like that.
Right.
Where things that are in-world parts of the story. But then the next layer is the theme that is generally about what kind of growth happens in the characters, something that is more emotionally connected in the reader's world.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the theme that we've discovered.
All right, and we'll get to that in a bit. First, we want to show you the timeline that we have been working on. This is something we've known we've needed for a while, as we've kind of gotten lost and confused just discussing the story amongst ourselves. And so we're going to show that on screen, the timeline that we have constructed. And as you're looking at it now, one of the things you may notice is the years that we have along the bottom. Those are just a rough guideline right now, but you'll notice that the story starts right around present day, and then because this is a time travel novel, a lot of our story takes place decades into the future. And so one of the things that we are trying to figure out, and by we, mostly you've been putting in more of the effort into thinking about what this looks like, is how do we make a realistic future in our novel? What technologies and things like that are we going to have? But as we look at that timeline again, those dots that you see are our main world events, not necessarily main story events, but main events that go on in the world. And then the arrows represent actions that are taken to change the past. And then as those actions are taken, we create a new level of a new version of history. And that's what you see, the A through F there on the side, is all the versions of history. And then the green bars are where our storytelling takes place. So our storytelling only takes place in the last two versions of history. And then those first four versions of history are things that our characters find out about during those last two versions of history, during our storytelling there. And we've got the parts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Our story is told not exactly chronologically. There's some interesting out of order stuff that's going on in our storytelling. And then you'll also notice that part 2, we have this little bar beneath it. What happens here? We've noticed that a lot of our character development is going to take place in that section of the story, and we just really don't know much about what goes on there. So we have spent a lot of our time figuring out what goes on with the characters there, and that's where we've been spending a lot of our energy lately.
And when we compare against our previous spoiler video, we've made a number of changes. This timeline that we showed on the screen, it reflects some new things. For example, what is currently version A was new. Version B used to be the first version of history that we had in our minds, but we recognized that, for example, getting close to the year 2060, the time travel was invented, and we decided that whoever invented it gets upset because the knowledge acceleration board, which I think we introduced last time.
Yes, roughly.
Okay. Whoever is in charge of that commandeered time travel and began experimenting with it. And so that arrow there from timeline A to B is many, many versions of history with no significant story plot related events happening, all compressed into something happened to change history. So version B is the next interesting version of history. The other big change that we introduced is up in timeline E. In timeline E, part 2, where most of the story takes place, whatever happened in around 2040 caused the knowledge acceleration board not to exist in that version of history. And whoever it was that would have been the director, either that person or the main character ends up working together to send back the child of the would-be knowledge acceleration board director to go back in time and become the person who interrupts how they prevented the first disaster, and in doing so positioned themselves to become the director of the new knowledge acceleration board in lieu of the person who had been the director in previous versions of history. Confusing?
Enough, I think so. And one of the things, the importance of the knowledge acceleration board is that they are helping keep the world safe from people like the villain organization who are using time travel for nefarious purposes. That's why it's so important to have this knowledge acceleration board in place.
Right.
So, like you said, very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any questions for us about what all that means, please drop them in the comment section. We will be glad to try to help you understand what is going on, because we know it is quite confusing, and we have spent hours trying to figure out what this story looks like. But I mentioned at the beginning a theme that we've seen that's emerging, and it ties into the last new point that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
which is the cab director's child being sent back to become the new cab director. And this is the theme of a parent-child relationship.
Mm.
And this is something that we're experiencing in real life, exploring that as we're going from father-son to also co-partners on this journey. But there are a lot of instances throughout the story that we see this parent-child dynamic coming up as important, especially when we're dealing with people who have been sent back and have adopted parents. They also have their biological parents, and there's all sorts of interesting dynamics there that we're trying to figure out what that looks like. But we do see that parent-child theme coming up a lot
Mm-hmm.
in our text.
Especially when they, like you said, they're the adopted parents, and then they get pulled forward in time. Now their adoptive
Yes.
parents are now 14 years older. Their child has disappeared and suddenly shows up again, still 16 years old. What does that new parent-child dynamic
Yes.
look like? And that leads to the bullet point that I saved for this discussion, the possible theme to explore. And that is something that in hindsight now looks like it should have been obvious to us,
Okay.
but a whole new realm of things to look at. And that is, we had talked about how main character 3, one of the scientists who is now 30 years old, actually, we discover partway through, is the biological sibling of main character 2, who was pulled forward in time at age 16. So a 16-year-old and a 30-year-old who are actually not just siblings, but biological twins.
Yes.
And what I realized was, if I were the parent of the 30-year-old and I discovered, what? You have a 14-year-old biological sister who just showed up and they're trying to figure out what to do with her? I would want to then adopt that.
Yeah.
I would want to adopt her. But yet she also has the set of parents that were about to adopt her before she disappeared. So there's a whole new realm of parent-child, the feeling of connectedness, but not quite, in that whole exploration of relationship there that just kind of multiplies and turns it on its head.
Wow.
So that was my bullet point.
Yeah, like you said, it seems like it should have been obvious. But yeah, that would be interesting to explore. So my bullet point also relates to that same, to part 3 in our storytelling. And it kind of starts out as a question, and that is...
So yours is mine was part 2, I think.
yours is part 2.
Okay.
Mine is part 3, yes.
This is going to be fun, bringing up the graphic and putting it back down again.
Have fun doing the editing.
Yes. All right.
In part 3, how secret or private is what the scientists are doing, specifically with bringing the people back, pulling them into the future from 14, 15 years into the past. I don't know if we've looked into the answer to that question much at all. Do you remember us?
I don't.
Okay. I didn't think we had. And so I see challenges on either side of if they keep it private versus if they keep it public.
Okay.
And if it's public, all of a sudden the news media is going to want to get really involved, figure out what's going on. They would want to talk to the kids, and all this is going to want to be public. Scientists probably want to keep some of this under wraps to keep the kids in a area where they can use them the way that they need to. Some of the kids are probably going to want to be like, oh, people want to interview me? I want to be on TV.
Okay.
I want to go out and make a name for myself. And so there's some issues that could come up there. If they keep it private, I think that would cause even more difficulties potentially.
In the storytelling or in world?
In world.
Okay. My gut says that if I were in their shoes, I would probably want to keep it quiet.
Okay.
So
here's the issue I see if they keep it private. 15 years ago, these kids disappeared. They're on missing child posters and whatever. And all of a sudden, they show up looking exactly like they did on the missing child posters, not aged a day. So if people see them, that's going to be they're going to put two and two together if they know if people have been on the case looking for them. And so what the scientists would then want to do to prevent that is keep these kids as enclosed as possible. Keep them in the building, keep them in the science compound, make sure they don't get out so people can see.
Oof.
And if I'm a teenager who has just been pulled from the past into the future, staying in one building is the last thing I want to do. I'm going to want to get out, explore the world. I never want to be tied down to one building, but especially if it's a whole new world of possibility and things to explore and to learn. A teenager is going to want to be a rebellious teenager.
You never told me that if I agreed to come forward in time that you were going to make me a prisoner.
Right.
Oh,
yes.
Goodness.
So there's a lot of issues that you could have keeping it private, keeping it secret what's going on with the teenagers wanting to kind of go against that. And then also, again, if it's being public, I think the biggest issue is the parents of the kids who pulled them from. They want their kid back.
Yes. So I think that opens up a whole world to explore in that whole what happens next, what happens in here.
There's a whole world of conflict wherever we want to go on that spectrum of keeping things private to letting people know what's going on. There's a whole world of conflict there. So that is kind of what we have been doing in our plot, the progress that we have made. Again, really confusing timeline. If you have any questions, any thoughts on that, on what we've said, please let us know in the comments. We'd be glad to answer any questions you have, and we will see you next week.